Well, last week we made a big deal about the fact that in contraception, you strike to the heart not only of the family but of the church. You put a dagger into that meeting point, that connecting point between the head and the body, which gives life to the church, and we spent some time on that. There's a guy on Catholic radio. He's a really good guy. Don't get me wrong. It's Al Cresta, and he's a very faithful Catholic, and he does a lot of good work. I think this was many years ago. I don't know how many, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. He was trying to make the point that abortion was the defining issue of the 20th century, like slavery had been the defining issue of the 19th century. So he had the people, did a poll, people would call in, and they would say what they thought the defining issue was of the 20th century as a Catholic. And to his amazement, I guess, they said contraception. So I said, yes, of course, it's abortion, but contraception is the root cause of abortion. So I guess for him it was still abortion. Well, God bless you, Al, but abortion is just one of a whole lot of consequences of contraception. There's fornication, there's divorce, there is the destruction of the social fabric, there is the rise of the homosexual agenda. And although abortion, certainly you're directly taking the life of an innocent child, so the single sin is worse than contraception, because in contraception, we'll get to this, you only kill your kids sometimes, whereas abortion, you kill your kids all the time. But that said, the defining issue of the 20th century, well, I guess well into the 21st century or the modern era, is contraception, not because it is the cause of abortion, but because it is contraception. And the reason we've talked about a lot of consequences that are pretty grave from contraception, but the ultimate reason is it's, as I just said, it strikes to the heart, it strikes to the lifeblood of the church. The secular society, it bounces around. The church has all the energy. It is able to transform, to speak to the secular society. But the key issue as far as the demons are concerned, as far as the forces of evil, the key issue is not whether the secular society does something, but what happens in the church. And contraception has simply fractured. It has taken the power, the energy out of the church. It is looked upon in that way, it is by far the gravest thing in the world. We talked last time about the liturgy and how there was no way that the unifying bond of love which comes to us in the Eucharist, that suffuses and knits together all the members of the church in union with the head, there's no way that survives if the people not only contracept, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but if they have a contraceptive model of life, a contraceptive model of what society is supposed to be like, they're blocked out from the Eucharist. And all the reform grace that's supposed to come from the Eucharist fails. And instead of this union, this marvelous brotherhood, this internal bond of love in Jesus Christ with which we are bound together in the Eucharist, the people who are blocked out from it, the priests, and to some degree, in many cases, the congregation, they look for these ersatz, these false ways of promoting unity, of being relevant, and hence you have all of these horrible, indescribable abuses of the sacred liturgy. if you've ever been in such a situation, you see that what these people are doing is laughable or would be laughable. It's liturgically absurd or would be laughably absurd if it weren't for the fact that we are dealing with the liturgy. So the key issue, one of the key issues, it seems there are a lot, is that it blocks us off from all the energy of reform. Now, someone complained to me, I don't want to point a finger, somebody complained to me that it was all dark. Everything that I said was dark. How do we get out of this? Well, if you have, we're all kind of, if you're here and you're kind of latching on to what I say, you belong to what's called the remnant. God works with remnants. Jesus, and then with him Peter and all the disciples, they were the remnant of Israel. It's a small group that's faithful to God. And you say, oh my gosh, I'm one of the remnant. Thank goodness, now we can relax. We're on our way to the upstairs, folks. No, it doesn't work that way at all. Sorry. When you're the remnant, it means that a task falls on you as the faithful remainder of Israel. And that task is to turn and convert the brethren. So being the remnant is an important thing, and it doesn't matter how many. It can be relatively small, and if we're talking about contraception, it's a really small percentage of people. If you are open to the truth of married love, and the beauty of married love has never been described any better by anybody as it has by the magisterium of the church, starting with the letter Arcanum in the late 19th century, and then into these great letters, Casti Connubii, the statements of Pius XII, Humanae Vitae, and all the theology, the body, and many other statements of John Paul II, all the way up into our present day. If you are able to see the truth of the body, if you are able to see the truth of the one flesh of husband and wife, the one flesh of the husband and wife, the union of husband and wife, is a sign, is a sacrament of the sacrament, if you wish. It's the sign of the Eucharist. So on the negative side, if you deny the union of husband and wife, which you necessarily have to do with contraception, you're blocked out from the Eucharist. On the other hand, as you appreciate the fullness of the beauty of the union of husband and wife, the truth of the family, then there's a window opening into the Eucharist. What father or mother hasn't sacrificed for the children? What father or mother hasn't given himself or herself up for the spouse? And yet that's exactly what Christ does in the Eucharist. It's his sacrifice. It's his giving up his body. This is my body which is given over and broken for you. So that the graces of people who are committed to the church's teaching on sexuality, the Eucharistic graces of reform is unimaginable. It's a flood of graces. So that if you had societies which were committed to, dedicated to the truth of the openness of love between husband and wife, the marital mysticism whereby they enter into the highest stages of commitment and giving themselves over to God as a couple, and in such societies. You could have single people, you could have priests. If you had such groups, the graces would be the renewal of the Eucharist, the renewal of the church from the fountainhead of the Eucharist would be tremendous, would be just tremendous. We live in a world in which, I know a lot of people, everyone's, you hear a lot of, who's saved, who isn't saved? Was my Uncle Hyman saved? He didn't go to Mass, and we're not sure about him. And was Aunt Gertrude saved because she wasn't a Catholic? We have 1.2 billion people in the Catholic Church. That's a lot. We have 7 or 8 billion people in the world. What about those pygmies in the jungle, or the people in China? The vast majority of people are saved because they are made over into Christ by the dynamic of marriage. I'm not saying, it's not anonymous Christian or anything like that. But people in marriage sacrifice. You don't have to be a Catholic or a Christian. They sacrifice. They give themselves over. They commit. And especially one sees this many times. A young man gets married, or even a young woman now, and they just can't give themselves, I'm not used to this kind of, and then the first child is born, and then there's a tremendous transformation in the individual. The marriage is what's called, has been termed in the church, a natural sacrament, because it goes back to the Garden of Eden, even if you're not a Catholic or a Christian. It's this bridge between the natural world and the supernatural world. So that most people are saved because of the dynamic requirements that they respond to in marriage. But if you have a model of marriage that is not the model of complete self-sacrifice, and that's the model that's presented everywhere, that whole natural bridge from the world of nature into the world of Christ, the Christian beauty, that natural bridge doesn't function the way that it should. Another way to talk about it is this. People feel that they have to do things. They feel there's a requirement. Their conscience speaks to them. I gotta do this. St. Paul talks about this in the 7th chapter of the letter to Romans. The law is good and spiritual. I try to keep the law. My flesh is another law. I keep failing. I'm paraphrasing. I keep failing. Woe to me, I'm caught in this body of death. Who will save me from this body of death? Thanks be to God and Jesus Christ our Lord. That is, that inability, knowing the right thing to do, and not being able to do it as you know you should, there's always, well, my gosh, I'm a failure. In God's economy, it sets you up for the redemption. So that if the Christian world, if the Catholic world puts out a model of matrimony that is utterly demanding, you don't have to be a Catholic. You might not have the ability right now to become a Catholic. That happens all the time. But that model of matrimony that people live and that the church presents everywhere, that model of matrimony strikes you as, oh yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I can't do it, and I try and I can't do it. What does that mean? That your life is a failure? No, there's a gap in there. I can't do it. This is the way it has to be. And Christ comes into the gap. So there's a whole economy of salvation that is bound up in marriage and bound up in the valid teaching about what marriage really is. We've talked about the fact that marriage, or the unity of marriage, the one flesh of marriage, either opens you up to, or if you deny it, blocks you out from enormously important things that everybody in Catholicism is settled upon. It blocks you out from the Eucharist, the real presence of the body of Christ, the body and blood of Christ. It blocks you out from the understanding of Christ as head and church as body, if you deny what the church teaches. That's another sign, folks, that this is infallible. When a teaching, its acceptance or refusal is utterly important for other teachings which everybody has agreed upon, then this teaching is irreformable. The teaching on contraception, the teaching on contraception affirms or denies teachings that everybody has agreed upon, like transubstantiation or the mystical body of Christ. Hence, that's a sign, that's one of the indicators that we're dealing with an infallible and irreformable teaching. It's another indicator that we're dealing with an infallible and irreformable teaching. There are people out there, far be it from me to name names, there are people out there like Charles Kern or Richard McBrien or others like that. You might read them in America or other magazines. And they say, look, the church ever since 1968, or probably more since 1980, or whatever you wish, has used contraception as a litmus test. That if they're considering making somebody a bishop or putting them into a high administrative post, they vet the person, that is, they investigate the person, they question them. And one of the things that they question them on all the time is, do you believe, do you hold to the church's teaching on contraception? So that every person, at least in fairly recent memory, who becomes a bishop has answered yes to that. Because if they answered no, they could never become a bishop. And these people bemoan the fact. They say, oh my gosh, it causes division in the church. Every bishop has to support contraception, but there's a whole lot of people in the laity and theologians and priests that do not. And so it's caused a great rift in the church. Stop vetting these people and asking them if they support the church's teaching on contraception. Well, and they say, if you do that, you'll bring about new unity in the church. Everybody will be happy again. Well, the first thing to say about that is they didn't have to worry, because a very large number of people who are vetted and respond, yes, I believe in contraception, have a model. It's not just that they individually do it. They have a model where you say, yes, I believe in the church's teaching on contraception, and you never do anything about it. In fact, you will go so far as to let people who work for you suppress any statement about contraception. That is, if you hold what the church teaches, and there's never any trouble in the people that you administrate, everybody's okay, nobody ever causes a ruckus, then you can make your way up. But the prophetic voice is rare indeed. Well, folks, unity doesn't come about by everybody agreeing on this and that. That's called a town meeting, and it can be right or wrong depending on which way they vote. Unity is in the truth. Unity is in the truth. And that brings me to the last thing that Benedict XVI wanted to reestablish in the church and in Western civilization. He wanted to put Western civilization back onto a rational basis. Well, the elephant in the living room is that the church's teaching on contraception is not just positive, what's called positive law. Don't eat meat on Friday. Now you can eat meat on Friday if you do another penance. Ta-da-da-da. That's not what it is. It's not only men can become priests. That's divine law. God has established it like that. But it's not part of human rational nature. We don't know. God decides certain things. But the natural law, the church teaches that this is part of the natural law, means that a supremely endowed human being that was a really rational guy or gal could come to the teaching. So when Western civilization and the church, to a great extent with it, denies the teaching on contraception, it has become, so to speak, to some degree, lunatic or schizophrenic, because it's denying, everybody's standing there denying their own rational nature. It wasn't always that way. There are some people that didn't have anything to do with the Catholic Church that understood the natural law. For example, Sigmund Freud, of all people, the founder of psychoanalysis, bright guy. He understood that if you detach the sexual act from the ability, from openness to life, that was the source of all perversion. I guess he understood the human psyche to a great deal. Mahatma Gandhi said that if a woman practices contraception, she becomes a prostitute. She doesn't become a prostitute. She becomes a prostitute for one person, her husband, but she becomes a prostitute nevertheless. So I would say if you went around in the year 1900 or 1910, a whole lot of people would have just said, oh yeah, of course, it has to be wrong. It's part of the natural law, even if they couldn't formulate it. So that if you have a church in which functionally a great number of bishops do not support the church's teaching on contraception, even though formally, verbally they do, and much more than a majority of priests do not hold to the church's teaching on contraception, and well over 90% of the laity have either contracepted or think it's right to contracept, you have a dysfunctional church. What are the consequences of that one? Well, the letter Humanae Vitae came out in 1968. The letter required that every priest be taught with clarity what the church's sexual ethic is, including the ethic of contraception. So that there was something that was required in the seminary. Pius XI in Casti Connubii said any priest who not only, if any priest simply tells somebody the wrong story about contraception, or even fails to enlighten the people under his charge about contraception, that he will have to answer to the Supreme Judge. And he talks about that priest and those who go along with him as the blind, leading the blind, and both of them fall into a pit. So his words were solemn and grave indeed. What is one to say about bishops and priests this day? Is it Pius XI? Well, that was a long time ago. No, the words of Pius XI ring true today. What is one to say about bishops? What is one to say about priests? What is one to say about their final destiny? I'm not threatening anybody with hellfire and damnation. I don't do that kind of thing. But God's mercy is infinite, and in both priests and bishops, the ignorance is just beyond all measure. So in 1968, when that letter came out, Humanae Vitae, the bishops of the United States wrote a letter about the letter on the family. And the letter, I've read it. It's sound enough. But after writing that letter, the vast majority, the episcopate, if you take it as a whole, there are great exceptions to that, but the episcopate, if you take it as a whole, simply remained silent, simply remained non-active. Well, if you come to 1973, you get Roe v. Wade. And the letter said, Humanae Vitae said, that abortion follows contraception as night, well, it should be night follows day, but it's really night follows night. That is, it was inevitable. Now, the Catholic Church had the ability to make or break, and the bishops of the Catholic Church, in matters of morality, had at one time the ability to make or break any political figure if they went off the deep end morally. There was a time, for example, in the 1940s, a movie couldn't be put into release unless some priest of the Catholic Church had seen it and had said that it was okay. Well, I don't know if Roe v. Wade would have come about anyways, whether the Catholic bishops had acted or not. But the Catholic bishops' inability to act prophetically took all of the vigor, the Catholic Church is not a political institution, but all of the moral vigor that then applied to the political world, it took all the vigor out of the Catholic Church. And I don't know what would have happened anyway, but the bishops have a lot to answer for. Well, you can say to me, look, Marty, the bishops then are a different group from the bishops now. That is, in 1973, that's 38 years ago, most of them are dead, and this is a whole new group. Yeah, but it's the same body doing basically the same thing. So if you say, well, what caused the breakdown of society in the United States? Well, you can go out and simply point to the Episcopal Conference, and they can say, look, we did stuff. It would have, it's the modern times, there was no way to stop it. Yeah, but if you had been prophetic and then it had happened, that would have been different. But they were not. They were not prophetic at all. They only one, I think, Cardinal O'Boyle in Washington. He was not the only one, but he was the most outstanding example. He wrote pamphlets and he did a whole lot to spread the church's teaching. Well, that's the bad guys. Or the people that were not bad guys. These are, I love them all, don't get me wrong. I love every one of them. But these are the people that we're rebuking, I guess. Well, then there's the good guys. And I can name some of them. Can't name all of them because I don't know what happens. I don't sit down in the conferences of the United States Catholic Conference, and I'm not an insider, God forbid. And there's, Archbishop Chaput in Denver, who wrote a letter on contraception, and then in his diocese he requires every couples who are going to get married, he requires them to take an NFP course. And Archbishop Burke, I talked about him before, the former Archbishop of, now Cardinal Burke, former Archbishop of St. Louis, he made a very strong statement about it. Bishop Bruskowitz's predecessor, gosh, the name escapes me, he wrote a very strong letter on contraception, and Bishop Bruskowitz himself has talked about it. Carlson, who succeeded Burke in St. Louis, he wrote a letter on contraception earlier in his career. And Bishop Vasha out in Oregon, you have to sign an oath that you accept the church's teaching on a lot of things, but including contraception, if you want to work for the Catholic Church. This is all very happy. I'm very happy that they're all doing that. But I'm going to make a few remarks, and after the few remarks, you'll probably say, well, if they have friends like you, Marty, they don't need enemies.